How did I pick Madeira? That's a great question. Um, I typically like to take a couple of trips a year, a couple of adventures, and I was debating for this year. I just finished a large project at work, and I needed to decompress. And so I was thinking of a couple of different places. I was thinking of going back to Iceland, or going back to the Canadian Rockies, to Banff and Jasper. The problem was that the Canadian Rockies, the timing just would not work. There were specific things I wanted to see. I wanted to see Abraham Lake with the methane bubbles that are frozen, but that typically doesn't happen until January, late December to January timeline. I also wanted to see Moraine Lake, not frozen, but in a landscape of snow. And the problem is that moraine, because it's a glacial lake, but it's at elevation, moraine freezes typically by early November. And so I was in this weird period where moraine would have already frozen, but Abraham Lake would not have frozen. And so I scratched the Canadian Rockies off of my list. Iceland was the other opportunity. It's wintertime. Most of the day is actually night, and so you've got the Northern Lights. And actually, a friend of mine was leading a tour in Iceland at the same time, so I'd have some company and so on. But my concern with Iceland was, even though I'd been there before, even though I've experienced, fairly experienced hiker adventurer in winter conditions. My concern in Iceland was that in this time of year, November, December, January, the weather is so fickle, so unpredictable, and not so much the cold, although it would be cold. My bigger concern was the wind. I have friends from northern Canada who have gone to Iceland in the winter and have talked about how windy it can be. So windy that your car sometimes can get blown off the road. Add to that the possibility of black ice on the highway, along with wind kind of buffeting and pushing your car back and forth. And I said, no way, I'm not doing it. So I actually talked to my friend who was in Iceland, who was planning to go to Iceland to lead this tour. And I asked him, give me some suggestions. And he said, why don't you pick Madeira? And so, of course, my first question was, where the heck is Madeira, right? So I had to do a little bit of research on Madeira. And, it turns out that, being right off the coast of Africa, belonging to Portugal, right off the coast of Africa, it was the perfect spot. Getting to Madeira is actually super easy. I am very fortunate to be living in the New York City area. 3 international airports. SATA Air Azores flies nonstop from JFK to Funchal, which is the capital of Madeira. Going eastbound, because you've got typically have a trade wind, you typically have a tailwind because of the trade winds. It's about a 5.5 hour and 45-minute flight, red eye flight, super easy. If you can sleep on the flight, that's great. I don't sleep well on flights. In fact, I don't sleep at all on flights. So that was a little painful, but at least it was a relatively short flight. Super comfortable. And I arrived in Funchal the next morning, and I rented a car. And you've got all of the Western car agencies. So I went through National Car Rental. They drive on the right-hand side in Madeira. Madeira is of course part of Portugal. In Portugal, they drive on the right-hand side. Madeira, they drive on the right-hand side. So I didn't have to retrain my brain to drive on the left like I did in Ireland. So very, very easy. It's a nice airport, not huge, not tiny either, but a good sized airport. I rented a car, and drove from the airport to the hotel, and I was staying in this actually this really really nice resort. I'm when I travel, sometimes I'll stay in nice places. Sometimes I'll stay in average places. It just so happened that early November, is the shoulder season in Madeira. So the hotel that I stayed in, literally right on the beach, fabulous. They had swimming pools, beautiful rooms, all overlooking the ocean. And it was €80 a night. So shoulder season, you can get some great deals. And yeah, that was my first impressions of Madeira. I will say, as soon as we landed, they don't have a jetway coming up to the airport. You do go downstairs. So one of the things I like about that when I travel is you get an immediate reaction to exposure to the temperature, the smell and so on of the place that you're in. It felt very tropical. There was a nice breeze. It was, I think when we landed, it was probably 70, 72 degrees Fahrenheit with a nice breeze. The sun was shining. What you would expect, perhaps if you were in, let's say, the Caribbean in the wintertime. That's what it felt like. So after arriving, checking into my hotel, I told myself, don't fall asleep. You need to get onto the schedule here. The time difference from Eastern time was 5 hours. So I wanted to make sure that I adjusted time zones as quickly as possible. So I didn't want to nap. And so I forced myself to stay awake, and I made it through to sunset, and I decided on that first evening that I wanted to shoot sunset on the southwest part of the island. There's an area called Punta do Sol. It's on the southwest of the island. About 30 minutes from my hotel, so not a big deal to get there. But it was a beach with an overlook. You've got some interesting rock outcroppings going out into the sea. So you've got some leading lines. The sun setting over the ocean. I thought, hey, this could be really really picturesque. And going into this, I had wanted to do a daily vlog, show people what I was seeing, how I was composing the shot, talking through the entire process of, hey, here's my settings, here's the EXIF on the camera, and maybe doing a video alongside the stills that I was shooting with my main camera. As it turned out, this beach was so crowded, and actually I wasn't on the beach. I was up on a platform, on a viewpoint, looking out at Punta do Sol. But it was so crowded that, and it was my very first time vlogging, so I'm already self-conscious. And needless to say, I ended up not videoing myself. And so I shot this sunset and came back, and I was editing it, and I was actually WhatsApping with my friend who was in Iceland at the time. And I kind of, and he said to me, so how'd it go? Did you video yourself? And I said, no, I was just way too self-conscious, way too many people. And he kind of just, said, hey, you're gonna have to get used to it. That's a price to play if you want to vlog. You're just gonna have to just get used to it. And he was right, because here's the funny thing, right? I mean, that entire week in Madeira, as I'm going around, there are other people vlogging, other people shooting video, and nobody cares. Certainly, they didn't care that I was around. Why should I care that they were around? So it was good advice, but it took a little getting used to. My second day in Madeira, I decided I wanted to shoot sunrise at the third highest peak in Madeira, which is Pico do Arriero. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that right, but Pico do Arriero, which is, Mount Arriero, the Peak Arriero. Third highest mountain, I believe it's 1,818 meters, which is just under 6,000 feet. Um, you know, Fortunately, you don't have to climb all the way to the top. You can if you want to. There are hiking trails from the base all the way up to 18 meters. But fortunately, for those of us who are trying to be more efficient with time, there is a road that goes all the way up to the top. Fairly good sized parking lot. And then from there are various hikes that branch off to various viewpoints. They call them in Portuguese. I think viewpoints are called miraduros. I'm sure I'm butchering the pronunciation, but miraduro means viewpoint. So there are a number of miraduros once you get to the parking lot and at Pico de Arriero, and you can branch off. One of the things with Madeira, even though it's such a small island, is it has these microclimates where it could be, on the western side of the island, it could be sunny, and on the eastern side of the island, it's pouring rain. And at the same time, it could also be, one weather pattern at sea level and a completely different weather pattern up at the top of one of the mountains. And so on this second morning, I woke up, I looked outside, patchy clouds, and I thought, well, I'm going to chance it. I'm going to drive up to the top, and I start driving. And as I start driving and going up this road, once I enter the national park, there's a very sharp turn off the road to get up into the national park, and suddenly it started to change. Suddenly, it just became completely fogged in. Now, mind you, I'm going there for sunrise, so it's pitch black, right? The roads are not well lit, so I've got my high beams on, and I'm driving, and it starts to get foggy. And so, of course, as you all know, in fog, your high beams are actually worse. So, anyway, it's the weather progressively gets worse and worse and worse, and then as I get closer to the top, it starts raining. And so finally I get to the very top. It's about a 35-minute drive from my hotel. So not that long from hotel to summit. But I got to the top. It is pouring rain. And so I'm sitting in my car and I look around and the parking lot is full of other cars that are still running. I mean, meaning the ignition's on, the people are sitting in their cars and they're all doing the same thing I'm doing, which is just, waiting for this rain to abate. And so there was a point where the rain finally sort of, I guess a rain band passed and a whole bunch of hikers all jumped out of their cars and, got their hoods on and so on. They went off hiking. There's a very famous hike from Pico de Arriero, which is the third highest peak, to Pico Ruivo, which is the highest peak. And so the hike from one peak to the other, I want to say it's a couple of hours, but it is pretty challenging. There's a lot of ups and downs and so on. But anyway, I got out of the car, walked out, did a little exploring, realized that there was no sunrise to be had today. And so you can see here some of the scenes of what it looked like that morning. And so anyway, look, this is the reality of adventure travel, right? It's not always blue skies and pretty sunrises and pretty sunsets. The reality of adventure travel photography is sometimes you deal with downright crappy conditions. You get up at 4:30 in the morning and you chance it and you get up there to your location. You've planned this for maybe days, possibly weeks. You get there and it's crap. As sometimes we say, we got whammied. I got whammied, and that's okay. That's life. That's what happens. But look, even if you get whammied, the thing is you don't give up. You come back and you try again. I decided, because of how easy Arriero was to get to the top, because you could drive right up to the top, I decided, hey, you know what? I'm going to come back here for sunset. Now, to be fair, when you're traveling and you set up these, you identify locations that you want to shoot from. Some are sunrise locations, some are sunset locations, just because of the way, like for example, if you're on the eastern side of the island and there's a peninsula that juts out to the east, it's probably not a good sunset location, right? It's going to be more of a sunrise location just because of the where it's facing and so on. But when you're up on mountaintops, oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, they work both as sunrise and sunset locations. Arriero is one of those. And so I decided, you know what? I got whammied at sunrise. I'm going back for sunset. And so I drove back up for sunset. Now, to give you a sense of what it's like at the top, it was at sea level 72, 73, 74 degrees Fahrenheit. At the top of the mountain, it wasn't that cold, right? 50, 52 degrees Fahrenheit. I want to say it was like maybe 9, 10 Celsius, 11 Celsius or so. Not a big deal. For someone who has traveled to Iceland, has traveled north of the Arctic Circle, has, adventured around the Canadian Rockies, I'm used to cold weather. You bundle, you layer properly. But I guess I, had not anticipated that 20-degree difference between bottom to top, add on the wind at the top of the mountain, would make me actually quite chilly. The wind was gusting. I would say probably, consistently 25 miles an hour, gusting to 30, 35 miles an hour or so. On top of that, Pico do Arriero is above the cloud layer, right? So typically clouds are forming at or below you. And so clouds that are at your level, as they're passing by, right, it looks like fog. It's a cloud that's passing, passing through you. That cloud's going to condense on you and your clothing. And when it condenses on you and the wind is blowing, you're going to get even colder. And so I am freezing my ass off on this peak, and I'm waiting for sunset. Sunset's at like 6:20 or so, right? I'm looking at my watch. It's 4:15, and I'm thinking, oh my God, there's no way I'm going to make this. And so I'm trying to take pictures as much as I can. It starts to get into golden hour. And at about 5:15, 5:30, I decided, oh, the heck with it. I can't do it. My hands are getting numb. I just can't do it. And so I decide to, start packing it in. I meet this other photographer up there. It was a German photographer. His name was Pascal. And Pascal and I start talking. And he says, hey, it would really be a shame if you went down now. It looks like it's going to turn out to be a really nice sunset. Why don't you hang around? And so he convinced me to stay. And so, we were chatting about, where we were from, what, our gear, and comparing our different gear. It kept my mind off of the cold and the wind. And I am so glad Pascal talked me into staying because, oh my God, that was probably the best sunset that entire week. I would say it's probably in the top 10 sunsets I've seen of all time for a number of reasons. The main reason is that with the mist and the clouds as they were passing through, and the sun as it starts to go behind the mountain, so I was trying to focus on this valley that was below, and I was trying to really focus on the interplay of light and shadow as the sunlight was casting these shadows into the valley below. What I didn't realize is that as the sun started to get lower and lower, just before it went below or behind the mountains, the passing clouds added this dreamlike quality. The light was so diffuse and so soft that it went from sort of this white to yellow to almost like a reddish tint. It looked like the top of the mountains were on fire. It was just phenomenal. I would say that it was probably one of the most sublime sunsets I have ever seen. So I'm glad Pascal talked me into staying. And then, after sunset, by the way, there was a wedding that was going on not 100 yards from where we were standing. I can't even imagine how freezing the bride must have been in her dress. They were there probably for an hour and a half taking photos and doing their vows and taking photos and so on. And I thought to myself, well, if they can be out here, I can be out here. And so I'm glad Pascal talked me into staying. And then we said our goodbyes, and we walked away. I drove back to my hotel. And look, here's one of the most interesting things about traveling to these locations. Here I am, 300 or so miles off the coast of Western Africa, right? 300 miles from Casablanca, Morocco. Sounds exotic. It is exotic, but there I am in the hotel. Had dinner at the hotel, and and every night there was live entertainment. So there was this singer who I'm assuming was Portuguese, but he was singing Beatles songs. And so, right, so it dawned on me, like, here I am 3,000 odd miles away from home, off the coast of another continent, listening to a singer actually do a really good rendition of Hey Jude. It was just, I don't know, it's for such a big world, it's such a small world. It's those connections, of meeting a random photographer who talks you into staying, and you witness the most sublime sunset ever, and then listening to one of my favorite songs, probably my favorite song of all time, being played by someone who for whom English is not his first language, and doing it really, really well. It's reasons like that. It's times like that. It's experiences like that make me really enjoy traveling.
Thinking you're waiting for someone to perform away. And don't you know that just for you, hey, you,
Fanal is not of this earth. Fanal is just a fantasy land, is maybe the best way, or an enchanted forest is the best way I can describe it. I happened to be there at midday, probably around noon. And to my absolute luck, now I was not planning on going to the forest, I just happened to be driving past it on my way back to the hotel. I turn and look, and to my surprise, I see fog rolling in. So immediately canceled my afternoon plans, drive into Fanal, and spent the day, just, the next couple of hours at least, just walking through this forest, getting lost. It was just, here, you can see some photos here. These are just amazing, enchanted, mystical photos. Okay, so my fifth day, which was my last full day on the island, I decided to drive back to the top of Pico do Arriero because, again, I was really after a sunrise on Pico do Arriero, right? The first time I drove up there, it was foggy and rainy. I did go back for sunset, but I really wanted a sunrise off of Pico do Arriero. The other thing, so I mentioned before about Fanal and how, if you're lucky, as I was, if you're lucky, you'll get to Fanal while it's cloudy and foggy, right? The other interesting phenomenon that occurs besides the fog at Fanal is this thing called cloud inversion. And Madeira is known for this. Cloud inversion occurs, so if you think about it, typically, in the atmosphere, it's warm near the surface. And then as you progressively get higher and higher in the atmosphere, it gets colder and colder and colder, right? As you get further away from the land. A cloud inversion, or a temperature inversion, as it's sometimes called, is when the exact opposite happens. You get cold air, a cold air mass near the surface, and then you have a warmer air mass above that cold air mass, which essentially traps the cold air mass underneath. And what happens is, because that's colder, and by the way, it also has to that cold air mass also needs to be relatively humid. So the humidity needs to be, at a certain level. What happens then is, because of the humidity and the colder air, clouds form closer to the ground. But up above, where it's warmer, you typically will have clear skies. And this happens. This can happen frequently in Madeira. And so on my fifth day, I drove back up to Pico de Arriero for sunrise, and to my surprise, there was a cloud inversion going on. So I'm up at close to 6,000 feet on the top of this mountain, and I'm looking down, and there is this cloud layer, and it is just a layer of clouds. It is dark. It is blue hour. Still maybe half hour, 40 minutes to sunrise or so. So it's hard to tell that they're clouds. It looks like the ocean. So as you look more closely, you can see, no, it's not the ocean. It's actually clouds. And there you are. There I am, standing above the clouds. It's just a surreal experience. And then you wait, and you can see the eastern horizon starting to brighten, and slowly but surely, it starts to, you start to see all the colors of, twilight, golden hour, and then the sunrise, and then to see the sun breaking over the cloud layer and then coming up over the clouds is just a phenomenal experience. I think I'd be remiss if I didn't share other things about Madeira, besides the great hiking, the views, the sunrises and the sunsets. From a food perspective, it is very meat heavy. It's a Portuguese cuisine, right? But also, because it's an island and it's surrounded by water, there's a lot of seafood, and it's fresh. For me, who I'm an occasional pescatarian, which basically means that primarily vegetarian, but when I go out to eat or I'm traveling, for sure, if there's fresh fish on the menu, I'm gonna definitely gonna be open to that. So I will say the fish was phenomenal. It was better than, definitely much better and tastier and better prepared than Icelandic food. Sorry, Iceland. But the other thing about Madeira, and Madeira is known for this, is its world-class wine. You may have heard of Madeira wine. It is every bit as good as as people say it is. I did buy a couple of bottles at duty free to bring home. So in a nutshell, right? You've got this island that people have never heard of. A lot of people have never heard of. Great food, phenomenal wine. Very entertainment. In the evenings. Small island. From one end to the other, an hour and a half max from one end to the other. You've got the gamut from mountains to forests, and to beaches, and everything in between. And they drive on the right-hand side. And if you're like me, chances are you'll make some uncanny connections with people, in the course of a week. So all in all, a fantastic experience. Can't wait to go to the neighboring Azores very, very soon.